What is up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the Touchline Talk Show. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the content I put out on YouTube every single week. Pretty simple show today. I'm only going to talk about two things before we get to the weekend look ahead. Both of them pretty big pieces of information, pretty big news items, though, so I'm going to save one segment for each of them, starting with Christian Pulisic officially slash unofficially headed to AC Milan. Everything is essentially done except for the announcement. He is in Milan. You may have seen the videos going through his medical. He is there to officially be announced as an AC Milan player. The announcement just hasn't come quite yet. But this is the time where we can start talking about this. It should be, by the time maybe even you're seeing this video, he may be officially introduced as an AC Milan player. Before I get to the AC Milan side of this, I want to address a general narrative with Pulisic. Him struggling at Chelsea, him not getting consistent playing time at Chelsea, is just not that big of a deal in the grand scheme of things. I've mentioned this before, and I will say it again here. There are only a handful of players at a club like Chelsea who are lockdown starters. You're thinking N'Golo Kante when he was healthy a few years ago, a guy like Eden Hazard when he was at his best at Chelsea, a defender or two, Cesar Azpilicueta for the most part over the last decade or so. There are guys here or there that were clearly starters. But by and large, when you get to this level, whether it's Chelsea, whether it's Barcelona, whether it's Man City, doesn't matter. You just aren't guaranteed to start the spot in the starting lineup. And so if somebody goes on a tear, you might be doing just fine. You're not getting in. If you get injured, you don't get your spot back right away. And we've seen this with Pulisic. He had that tear during lockdown, and he stayed in the starting 11. And then he got hurt, and it's been difficult every time he gets hurt for him to break back into the starting lineup because there are no guaranteed spots there, especially on the wing. Look at what happened to Mason Mount. He was the best player on that team 2 seasons ago, and last season didn't go very well for him. It's not like this is specific to Pulisic. It is the reality of being a role player at one of the biggest clubs in the world. And so I bring this up to address what Landon Donovan said, that you have probably seen by now. He threw out the idea that Pulisic should come back to MLS. He mentioned the LA Galaxy and basically said they should just pay him whatever he can so that he knows he's playing heading into the 2026 World Cup. Not getting to play at Chelsea and not being able to cut it in Europe are two completely different things. That is not the conversation we need to be having about Christian Pulisic right now. This is not a talent issue. Maybe he's not quite good enough to be at a team that expects to be contending for a Premier League title and expects to be competing in the Champions League, as in trying to win the competition. That's fine. There aren't that many players in the world that are good enough to kind of carve out a spot for themselves at those kind of clubs, because there are only 5 to 10 of them in the world. There's just no reason to be super concerned about this right now. He needed to leave, and he is leaving. To me, that's the end of the Chelsea part of this story. On the AC Milan side, there is a clear role and a glaring need that he can address for this team, because it sounds like he's going to play as a number 10. I talked about this all season long. They lacked any kind of creativity outside of Rafael Leao. They just didn't have anything to offer if he wasn't the best player on the field or if he was injured. They need more creative players like Christian Pulisic. It's a really good fit from that standpoint. He needs an opportunity to play and to express himself and to have some freedom that you could argue he didn't have at Chelsea. And AC Milan need more players to make things happen and more players with ideas. And Christian Pulisic has ideas. Again, this is not a talent issue. So I really like this fit. The next part. Let's just talk worst case scenario here and say whether it's injuries or he just doesn't end up really getting a spot in the starting lineup consistently and he finds himself wanting to play more regularly again in a year or two. There is still time to correct that and address that before the 2026 World Cup. This is a 24-year-old who was playing for Borussia Dortmund in the Champions League and playing real minutes for Borussia Dortmund as a teenager. He's going to figure this out and find a spot eventually. And in a worst case scenario, maybe that's Major League Soccer. If he just can't get the injuries under control and the AC Milan thing doesn't go well, and so now the clubs that he would be interested in playing in Europe don't necessarily want to take a chance on him, okay, then we can talk about MLS being an option. But we are so far from that happening. There was no reason for Pulisic to give up on this now and to buy into what Landon Donovan was saying. It just doesn't make sense at all to me. Go give it another shot at the highest level in Europe. At a team where you feel like you have a much better chance of really cementing yourself. At a team where you can see how you address something that they are looking for and you fit something that they want to fix in this transfer window. A team that is going to be trying to compete in the Champions League and qualify for the Champions League every season. Not expecting to win the competition. Obviously made the semifinals this season as more of a Cinderella underdog kind of thing. But this is still one of the top teams in Italy. It's not the top team. But this is, to me, where I always believed the sweet spot for Pulisic was. It's at your sort of second-tier Champions League clubs. Your Borussia Dortmunds, your AC Milans, your Inter Milans, your Marseilles, Atletico Madrid, those kind of teams where it's a really, really high level. You expect to be near the top of the table, maybe even competing for a league title. But you're not expecting to win the league and expecting to win the Champions League. It's one step down from where he was at Chelsea. That is where I think his sweet spot is. And AC Milan fit that perfectly. And playing in the Champions League and playing in European competition is really important at this moment in time in this transfer window, talking about these U.S. men's national team players with so many futures up in the air. Because I talked about this when the Weston McKennie loan to Leeds happened. At that point, you didn't have anybody from this U.S. men's national team playing a real role in the knockout stage of the Champions League. I know Pulisic was there, but Pulisic wasn't playing. Now you look at this, Pulisic's in a great position to be able to be a factor in the Champions League. Jordan Pefok's team qualified for the Champions League. Brendan Aronson is on loan at that team. That team has also been connected to Serginho Dest, Union Berlin. So that's a really good development. You got Pulisic settled. McKennie is the next guy, and also Tyler Adams, who has no business playing in the championship. I've said that before. But it is important to get at least some of these guys playing in European competitions and hopefully the Champions League. And at clubs where that is something that is a goal every season. So that they see the highest level that the sport has to offer. And 6 months ago, more like, yeah, I guess 6 is coming out of the World Cup, essentially. That just wasn't a thing based on the club situation with all these guys. And so it's getting better in that sense. And this was a big step because obviously Pulisic probably had the worst club situation out of anybody. Well, take that back. Serginho Dest had him because Dest was in the wilderness. He needs to figure that out too. But Pulisic is the guy, obviously the face of the team, the captain, all of those kind of things. So I'll end this where I started it with don't connect this too closely to Chelsea. It's two very different situations. I can't emphasize that part of it enough. There's no need to overreact about what struggling at Chelsea means for Christian Pulisic's future. Just like there's no need to for Mason Mount or any of the other guys who have gotten buried with all of these additions they've made. It didn't work at one particular club, and by the way, that club, Pulisic never got to play for the manager, or at least I don't think he ever played for him. Maybe briefly if I'm misremembering that. But he wasn't actually kind of integrated by the manager who bought him. Lampard did not seem to be a huge fan. He was manager twice. His relationship with Thomas Tuchel, that seemed to maybe be a positive, turned out to not be. He hasn't really had a manager that's willing to go to bat for him. That's part of this too. Actually going to a club that has a plan and wants you is just that in and of itself is a huge step in the right direction. So there's really no larger commentary to take away from the Chelsea experience for Christian Pulisic. It didn't work. Some of that is on him, and specifically the injuries, and some of that is on Chelsea's lack of planning. Because they invested all this money in him and then never actually had a plan as to what that was going to look like and just continued to spend more money when he wasn't delivering the way they wanted to immediately. He can't control any of that. So I am very, very optimistic about this. I don't see the downside. That's really ultimately what my conclusion is. If it doesn't work for whatever reason, now if it's injuries, that's a conversation about can Pulisic stay healthy because that carries anywhere. But assuming just talking on the field, if this doesn't work, then you got to change your approach the next time around, but there is still time to find somewhere where you can play consistently heading into 2026. And maybe at that point, it's time to reevaluate where you are in the overall soccer landscape. But not cracking into Chelsea's starting lineup is not a reason to reevaluate anything. There is nothing based on his performance on the field that suggests he is anything than the player that everybody believes he is and that he's shown to be. He was terrific during the Nations League for the U.S. That's still who he is. He just needs to find a spot to show that at the club level. And it wasn't working at Chelsea. He's got every opportunity to make it work at AC Milan. The risk here is very, very low. And if he didn't make this kind of move now, there's no guarantee he would get another chance to play at a club like AC Milan. Now, if it goes well, then maybe he gets another chance at Juventus or PSG or something like that. Barcelona, Real Madrid, whatever. But there was no reason to go too far down the totem pole when a club like AC Milan wants you. You got to bet on yourself. You got to believe in yourself. Talent-wise, he's a starter on this team. I firmly believe that. That's my taking out the U.S. men's national team part. Just watching AC Milan last season, to me, he's a starter. That number 10 spot is his. And if that's the case, this is a home run. And if it's not the case, it's still not the end of the world. I can't even think of a spot I would rather have Pulisic move to than this. To me, it is perfect. So we'll have to see what happens. Wait for the official introduction, the pictures, all of those kind of things. But Christian Pulisic in Milan, ready to join AC Milan for the next step of his career.